Okay, we're recording, we're here, we're going. We got AI summary happening, all this good stuff. This is just this. We are really getting to the end of the book. We're going to be starting tonight on page 105. That's where we started last week, but we're just going to run through the section and then pick up where we left off last week. Before we do that, is there anything from last week that someone wanted to bring up? Any old business? Anything rattling around in your minds that you just can't get out, must process? Okay. Going once, twice, thrice. We are on. Um, let's go ahead and just start on page 105. We'll just read through page 106 and we'll pick up. We got through halfway through the second paragraph or the full paragraph on page 106. So we'll get a running start on that and then we'll start breaking it down. So in Greek mythology, three female goddesses, the Furies, were the deities of retribution and vengeance. They were horrible to look at, with snakes for hair, black wings, and blood dripping from their eyes. Though they were supposedly pursuing and punishing evildoers, their righteous need for vengeance brought about little lasting good, because they needed to punish evil too much and thus became evil themselves. Does this not sound like what practitioners of modern nonviolent theory tell us? Violence begets violence. Our words furious and infuriated come from these goddesses. Their main problem was that their righteous anger consumed them, and their blind fury became an end in itself and the lasting message. It has taken us centuries to fully recognize this pattern is operating in human beings too. It is common for the psyche to put its hope in a retributive notion of justice, even though it never works long term. That reveals the classic pattern of all addiction. We keep doing something even when it's not working. The preoccupations of the Furies were what the later desert fathers and mothers would call passions, or what you and I would perhaps call addictive emotions. Whenever you see in yourself an excess of emotional response, you can be pretty certain that you are over identified with something or your shadow self has just been exposed. If you are incapable of detaching from an emotion, you are always far too attached. There is much evil and injustice in the world that deserves righteous anger. But a good practice is to watch that emotion a bit, to see where that anger is actually coming from. This will take humility and patience. If it is truly God's anger, you can also trust God to lead and resolve it to some degree. But when it's mostly your anger, using God as your justification, it will have too much urgency, too much of me, too much righteousness, too much impatience, too much need to humiliate the opponent. You almost always start there, but good therapy and spiritual direction will help you distinguish between your personal anger and God's pure anger. This might take some time to learn, but unless you do this, you will not have healthy or helpful emotional responses. The unhealthy ones will have you. This is surely what the Bible was pointing to in using a psychologically astute phrase of being possessed by a demon. Now let's go ahead and finish it. If you do not want to let go of something and keep justifying why you deserve this anger, you are probably operating out of your own offended ego. When you can let go of it, after properly acknowledging it, you can probably retrieve it without its excessive charge and then use it effectively. If you can't do that, I hate to say it, but you are likely possessed and need an exorcism. If you need to hate the president, your former wife, or the man who humiliated you, this is not God's anger. It is yours. As the school of Paul wisely puts it, you must not let the sun go down on your anger, which is far different than not feeling your anger at all. Some anger is needed and well deserved, but too much for too long will usually develop into a pathology that only blinds and destroys the angry person and the other party too. Very often, I find the whole thing can dissipate very quickly with one sincere smile, hug, or word from another human being. He or she does not realize it, but they are serving as your exorcist. You might almost resent them for doing it, but it reveals the actual emptiness of the anger. It was not really you at all, but you had let it become you. Notice in the Gospels how the possessed person always hates the exorcist. So maybe when the Furies have you, your practice can be to make eye contact and smile at another person, deliberately detaching from your Furies. But it will not be easy, nor come naturally. Okay. Anything jump out at you this time? Hi, Judy.
I sorry I'm late. Oh.
All right. Since you're late, you have to tell us what jumped out at you in that section we just read.
Oh dear. Where are we? 107?
Well, we just went to 105 to 108. We're going to restart on 106, but this is the second time we've read through this. Sometimes different things jump out at you. So, anything this time? Okay. So let's go back to page 106 and let's start right in the middle of that paragraph. Um, let's get a little bit of a running start. Gosh, I guess we got to go all the way back to the top of the paragraph. There is much evil and injustice in the world that deserves righteous anger. We talked about that a lot last week. You know, do we really need that righteous anger? And and we said yes, righteous anger can be a motivator. It can give us the energy. It can give us the drive that's needed to act and intervene. And at the moment of intervention, that's when the anger is very useful because it can help us to move through it. But he says it's a good practice to watch that emotion a bit to see where that anger is actually coming from. It's so difficult for us to discern if it's our anger or if it's, let's put it this way, is it endogenous or exogenous? Are you familiar with those terms? If it's endogenous, it's coming from within. If it's exogenous, it's coming from without. If we're really, if our righteous anger is appropriate, then it's being triggered by something that is exogenous. It's being triggered by something that is outside. It's a situation. It's a circumstance. It's something that's going down right now. It's a clear and present danger, and our anger is gearing us up, to be able to deal with that and intervene as necessary. But if our anger is endogenous, if it's coming from within, then it's being triggered by our core beliefs, our past hurts and traumas, our programs that are running in the unconscious. And it is really difficult to tell which is which when, especially when you're in the heat of battle. And so this is something that he says, it's going to take some time to be able to make that kind of discernment. It'll also take humility and patience. If it's truly God's anger, you can also trust God to lead and resolve it to some degree. Hmm. But when it's mostly your anger, using God as your justification, it will have too much urgency, too much of me, too much righteousness, too much impatience, too much need to humiliate the opponent. See, the thing about saying that if we're using God as our justification for the anger that is ours, um, that anger that we're talking about and the source of it is unconscious. So, it's not that easy to discern because it's not directly under our control. Man, if only it was written on the wall or on the inside of our eyelids someplace so we could actually read it and figure this stuff out. But it's a lot sneakier than that. I mean, these are things that are not going to be conscious for us. So making this discernment, especially in the midst of being triggered, man, that's really tough. That's why contemplation, and of course, remember, this is all relating to contemplative practice. The genius of contemplation is that it builds our awareness over time. Our awareness is becoming more and more keen, and not only that, it's catching up to us. So some things that we can see clearly in retrospect, we can look back and see where this and that was and how we were performing in certain situations. If if we can't have that kind of second sight, that ability to be the watcher in the moment as the thing is going down, then we're not going to be able to actually make an appropriate choice or decision. We're going to be ruled by the Furies. We're going to be ruled by these emotions that we're not even aware are driving us. And so building up our awareness and getting it to catch up to us. So now we're aware in real time. And when we're feeling that spike, we're feeling that pressure, we're feeling that anger and cortisol and everything that's coursing through us, we can stop and we can take that breath. And then we can start to let the watcher do its job, our true self, and then start to make the right decisions so that we can really be a part of the solution and not another part of the problem. But that's going to take time. It's not something that happens right away. Um, he says you almost always start there. Start where? Start with just this mix of jumble of emotions, right? But good therapy and spiritual direction will help you distinguish between your personal anger and God's anger. Um, Maybe this is a good time to just talk about this for a second. How do you think that you can know the difference between your personal anger and God's pure anger? Or maybe what we could call, um, I guess for lack of a better term, the righteous anger, the appropriate emotion that we would feel if we're witnessing some injustice, if we're witnessing some abuse or something that does need our intervention, and we feel that anger. How can we make the distinction between what's appropriate and what is, it's not that it's our internal anger is inappropriate, it's just inappropriate to the situation, if that helps. How do you think we can make that distinction?
Well, I wrote some notes from last week and about anger and God's anger. So this is my other perspective, that if I do something wrong or somebody else does something wrong, will God be angry with me or the other person? I don't not, now. My perspective is I don't believe so, because He won't exact punishment from me or nor revenge. He won't shame me or guilt trip me, but so if not with me, nor will He do it to the others. So I'm thinking now is maybe I'm projecting those of us who get angry. I'm projecting that anger onto God, the guilt, the shame, or whatever the reason is. But then I also put here: are we not anthropomorphizing God? To me, He's God. He's not human. I can feel anger and fear. God, I don't know. I think doesn't. It's like saying too that it's like the volcano is angry at us. So let's appease this God. Let's do tasks. Let's throw a couple of virgins into this. But He's God. I don't know. The anger is mine or ours. I don't think He's vengeful. I don't think He's can get angry. That's a human emotion,
Mhm.
because we
Well,
don't.
yeah, I think you know that I agree with you there, and that's why I was making the distinction. He calls it between our personal anger and God's pure anger, but since I really don't see God as angry or needing that particular emotion, I was trying to distinguish it between our personal anger, our endogenous anger, our anger that's coming up from our own triggers, and then what we were calling righteous anger, anger that is being triggered by the actual situation, what's going on, the abuse that we're seeing, the situation that needs to be corrected. So that's to me is the distinction. Can we make that distinction? Can we tell what is angering us from the outside and what is being triggered internally?
I just don't like the idea of calling that God's anger.
I'm with you there, buddy.
Um, and you had a quote last week. I forgot. It was something along the lines of like the dangers of doing great evil in the name of God and feeling. Remind me, who was that
That
from?
was Blaise Pascal. He said
Pas
that, yeah, yeah, no one does evil so cheerfully and completely as when they do it from religious conviction.
Um, yeah, I think, we have, like, I think it's ego who would be angry, and your ego, like in a case where there's actually an injustice that you're responding to,
Mhm.
right? I think a healthy egoic response would be to have anger, but I don't think I would call that God's anger. I think it gets a little messy because soon as I put it in that category and I feel empowered to, like, I can see that going out of control really quickly. Like
Mhm.
if I feel like this is God's vengeance I'm coming with here. Um, it's yeah.
And then it gets even messier, as he says right in the middle of the paragraph. Um, if it's truly God's anger, you can also trust God to lead and resolve it. But when it's mostly your anger, using God as your justification. See, this is when we get into the Blaise Pascal part,
Yeah.
right? If we're
Yes.
going to say, my anger is God's anger, well, now I've co-opted God. God is my wingman, and
Right.
there is no escape from that loop. That's a closed loop. Yeah,
Right.
end of discussion, right? And so now God is on your side. And that's where it really can
Mhm,
get sticky because you've lost, any ability to discern at that point.
mhm,
You've conflated everything.
mhm. And if even when, in fact, I would say always when it's coming from something internal, it's still being triggered by something external, right? Like there's so it's
So
like I
how can
look
we
at
tell the
that
difference? How
entire
can we tell the
paragraph.
difference? Because yes, it's being triggered by something external.
Mhm,
How can we tell the difference? I think there's a couple of clues that we can look at.
mhm,
I mean, would part of it be if you're tagging an injustice that you see, but you're escalating your own feelings to the point of wanting to retaliate against the perpetrator, um, and harm them. I don't know. I mean, but I'm
yeah.
thinking, what's consuming me here is, just imagining some of the scene when Jesus upended the tables, at the temple. And he certainly seemed to be justified because they were just disrespecting um God, by the travesty that they were causing with money, and it was worldly stuff and all of that. Um, but if it's getting so out of control that, you are um contemplating hurting someone in some way,
Mhm,
then that seems like that's over the top.
mhm,
I mean, I think that goes way beyond justifying an injustice.
And I think you're headed in exactly the right direction in terms of what I was thinking too. And maybe I can put it this way. Ask yourself if the punishment fits the crime.
right.
Okay.
Yeah, right.
So is what you're feeling really appropriate to what it is you're witnessing, or is it way over the top? And are your solutions to this, what you're contemplating doing, is that over the top? Like you're saying, when the car cuts you off on the freeway, do you go into a rage? Do you
Mhm,
honk your horn? Do you start following the car? Do you tailgate them? You can really overreact. If you're doing something like that, then you know that you're not dealing with a car that cuts you off. You're dealing with every instance in your life that felt like someone took your place, you know,
Mm.
cut the line, you know, wronged you, did whatever. So all of that rage from all of those times when you felt impotent and felt like you were passed over is now coming to the fore. And I think another thing is, are you starting to remember all those other instances of all those other times when you were feeling that way? And they all start to come up and bubble up and they're jumble in your mind.
Yeah.
That would be another clue that what you're dealing with is a trigger of all those old responses that were never really and fully resolved.
Right.
And I think that's what it is, David. It seems like it's triggers. I mean, that can blow it out of proportion. I remember once when I was younger, I was at a concert, and we were in a group, and there was clusters of people, and this guy was grabbing this girl's arm doing something, and she just flipped out. She was paranoid and screaming and all kinds of, and we weren't understanding what was happening. And then come to find out later, she had been assaulted in her past, so she was highly triggered by just the touch of that person pulling her arm, that man, whatever it was. And so I guess to me, that's a clue of a trigger that it was so personal. You know, I can see seeing an injustice and saying, wow, what I'm witnessing is really wrong. What can I do about this? Or maybe I need to say something to this person or this person in authority. But if that was something really personal to me, I might completely overreact. And so I think, to me, that's the difference. Maybe it's just the triggers of our own deep-seated stuff, or something that's really important to me. This issue is really important to me, and now I see an injustice, and now it's hyped up, 2.0, because I'm overreacting to something because it's so important to me, but it might not be as that important to the person next to me. Isn't it all just about triggers then?
Yeah, certainly.
Rohr wrote a book recently. It's called The Tears of Things, and I listened to a podcast on it. And he illuminates, similarly to Kath, to what you're saying, is that what often is underlying the triggers for us is unresolved grief. And so when we look at the prophets in Scripture, they did speak out against the injustices, but does that what Rohr is kind of looking at, as he goes, does your injustice, speaking out against injustice, lead you then to profound compassion? And if you don't land in profound compassion, then you're probably dealing with some unresolved grief stuff is coming up. And I remember a Tuesday night thing that we did, and Becky had spoken to something to that too, is that understanding that wherever you fall on the political spectrum in this polarization that's in our culture, that can we come together? And one thing that we have in common is people on the right are grieving, people on the left are grieving, and can we come together in the macro and just connect on our grief? And then also explore our own unresolved grief in terms of what we do and how we respond to this polarization. And can we get to that point of profound compassion for the other that we're projecting our unresolved grief towards?
Yeah,
Absolutely.
So now Danielle and Kathy too are taking us to a couple other clues I think that we've got. One is there really a clear and present danger that that's right in front of you? If there's not, then most likely this is really being triggered from within. But if there's something right in front of you that's going on that really, really requires your intervention in some sort of way, well, then you can say, okay, well, that actually makes sense. And then, of course, is your response measured? Is it appropriate to that? But then in terms of what Danielle was talking about with this compassion, when the clear and present danger passes, are you able to return back to decency? Are you able to return back to a place of compassion? Or does the anger remain at a high pitch? Does it still keep churning in your mind? Are you still plotting what you need to do? So what's your recovery time look like? And are you able to come back to that center? And so I think all of these are ways that we can start, but the key is you have to be aware in the moment to be able to make any of these distinctions. Otherwise, you're just you're just on the train and it's leaving the station, and that's the way that works. So if we are aware enough, we can start to say, let's break this down. I'm feeling this rush, this flush. What am I supposed to do with all of this? Is there a clear present danger? Is there something that needs to happen right now? Is there abuse that I do need to intervene, even physically? Is there a threat that needs to be put down? What's the appropriate response to that? Is my response over the top completely? And then when it's passed, am I able to return back? to a place of compassion and decency, or am I still wrapped up in all of those emotions?
You know, Dave, something you just said, and Danielle triggered it too. I'll give credit to Randy. He's not here tonight, but I think he posted it on one of his Facebook pages, and it stuck with me. It was the most interesting quote. It said, "Be thankful for your triggers because they show you where you are not free." And it's kind of what you're saying, because if you're spinning, thinking about this and lurking with whatever this is and over resonating with it after that incident is over, you're not free from that situation. You haven't resolved it really. So
Exactly.
it's, yeah, so that was very poignant, I thought.
Mm-hmm.
I like the warning light on the dashboard analogy. It's like you be thankful for your triggered negative emotions because they're like warning lights on the dash telling you something's wrong under the hood where you can't see it. But
Mhm.
it requires your attention. And if you continue to ignore that light, eventually you're going to end up in the ditch. And so, yes, these triggered emotions that feel like they're a blight, they're actually a gift. Pain is a gift. It tells us that something's wrong and there needs to be attention there. So this is yeah, this is all part of it. This ability to return to a place of compassion, though, I do think is really important. Do you remember when the SEAL team finally took out bin Laden, and then there was this exultation in some quarters, just cheering and dancing in the streets and that kind of thing, you know, over someone's death. Now, obviously, we can say that that intervention was necessary. Justice had to be served. There had to be a balancing of the scales in the macro sense, for our national identity, our national grief, our national, resolution of the issue. But to be able to exalt over a person's death, I think is taking we've gone a bridge too far then. Are we able to come back to a place of decency and say, okay, this was something that needed to happen, and we can even be glad that it's taken care of, it's resolved. But to exult in another person's death, I think is taking us to a place that we don't want to be, not as followers of Jesus. And so this is another thing that we can say, what is being triggered in us that allows us to act in an indecent way over someone's death. And so these are all, I think, clues that we can use, and they're not going to be available to us until we have done enough either therapy or spiritual direction, as he says, contemplative practice that allows us to build the kind of awareness and presence that we can bring to bear at the moment of the trigger, so that we can start to at least break this down enough to be able to stop, take a breath, and then evaluate where we are before we act. And then we get into the spiritual Hippocratic oath, first do no harm before we act. Is it appropriate? Is this fitting the situation? Is it appropriate to the situation?
Mhm.
And if we can't do that, what does he say at the end here? This might take some time to learn, but unless you do this, you will not have healthy or helpful emotional responses. The unhealthy ones will have you. We will be led around, literally, like the ring in the bull's nose. The tail will wag the dog. And this surely is what the Bible was pointing to and using the psychologically astute phrase of being possessed by a demon. We are literally possessed by our core beliefs. We're possessed by those programs running down there, possessed by our emotional triggers. And I know that we've all been there ourselves, but we all know people who don't have good emotional regulation, and they get triggered and they're off to the races. And it's really difficult to be in relationship with people like that.
It's even I'm noting too that sometimes I'm with the tenor of the times, with what's been going on in the world. I'm noting among some of my friends that they are jumping on all of the negative trashing of the other side. And it's some of it is kind of mean-spirited and sarcastic, and it's not, I don't know. it's heading, in my estimation, to be a little bit over the top, that it's kind of pointing in that direction of, okay, what's below this for you guys? Can we hold some space, that we can start to see both sides of the picture and take action where it's appropriate, but not almost collude with the trash talk that is going on, certainly, and too much so, I think, on the Democratic side. I'm kind of calling my own people out. Um, and I want to distance myself from that um and speak to it, when I'm good friends of those people that are my friends, and just have some conversations and and not respond. Sometimes no response is, when they'll send something via text or whatever, and it's that's not the person I want to be anymore. And I am trying hard to find that liminal space piece that we always talk about, and being able to speak my piece um, when I think it might be needed, and I could say it in a respectful and loving way, and a concerned way, for them and their mental health and their anxiety. Um, so it's bringing up that stuff for me in this conversation also. It's maybe not
That's
completely
exactly,
over the top,
yeah, that's
but
exactly spot on. And what is going on, what we're witnessing here. I mean, all of this that we're talking about, we're witnessing in spades. The Furies have us, right?
yeah.
The Furies
Yeah.
have us. And
God.
so, yes, and if we're over identified with the policies and the politics and whatever the causes may be, and if there's emotion wrapped around those deeply held beliefs that we've identified with, I mean, that's a virulent one-two punch. And Rohr brought that up in the last book. You have a deeply held belief, and then you wrap emotion around it, and it becomes an impenetrable object. And then you see you're so identified that your reaction is just way over the top. And it's not just happening in the trigger. Now it metastasizes. It
Mm,
becomes who we are. So even in the cool periods, all of that vitriol remains, and it
mm,
becomes just part of our speech and part of our attitude and part of the way we deal with life. And that's going to take some time to undo.
mm.
But what I like about what you're saying, Judy, is that you're aware enough right now that you're trying to hold the liminal space.
I'm
That's
trying.
beautiful. That's where we're all just trying to be. That's the best that we can do. We're not always going to be equal to the challenge of any moment.
Yeah.
The moment can get away from us. That's okay. It's not how many times you're triggered or not triggered that's going to show you your spiritual progress. It's the speed of your recovery time that's going to
Mm,
show you how you're progressing. So the triggers we can't help. What we do with them, we can. And how quickly we can come back to that liminal place is
yeah.
something that we can cultivate if we are intentional about it and we so choose.
Yeah.
In fact, going there on the next page, if you do not want to let go of something, okay, now we're talking about a step further, right? If you do not want to let go of something and keep justifying why you deserve this anger, you are probably operating out of your own offended ego. And so, this is, now we're getting into unforgiveness. We're getting into a place where we can be really addicted to victimhood,
Mhm.
addicted to drama, addicted to blame. Brene Brown was great with this. She called blame a discharge of discomfort and pain by assigning fault to others. So we're feeling some pain, we're feeling discomfort, we're feeling this roiling from the unconscious, and we don't know what to do with it. But one quick way to discharge it is to just blame someone else. The fault is over here. I don't have to look at myself anymore. It shelters me from the pain of doing that interior work that every single one of us needs to do, that Jesus' way is really all about. And it also absolves us if we are addicted to our victimhood, if we always see ourselves as a victim and everyone else is oppressing or opposing us, then it absolves us from any responsibility for change. Because a victim has no choice. A victim is perpetrated upon. And that's a warm blanket. That's a very comfortable place to be because nothing is required of a victim except to be saved. And so it can be something that we really can become addicted to because it's in a really, really ironic way is comforting to
Mm.
stay in that place.
I
So,
really like Brene Brown. I'm reading her Atlas of the Heart right now, and she delineates like 60 something different emotions. And it's really interesting. I think, and she talks about like the importance of the being able to talk about, put language to emotions and describe them, and to become like be that observer and become more aware of our emotions. And I think as a culture, we need to become there's it's we need to differentiate, like Danielle was saying, being able to come to that place of compassion. We have to deal with that grief in healthy ways. And so there's this people are expressing their emotions, but it's so unhealthy. And then there's this whole concept on the other end of, when we're going through or when there's like, how do you express it in a healthy way? There's ways that we can do that, and that's through awareness. I think is just we have to process it, but processing it with awareness is key. And so I think we need to for one thing, allow ourselves. Men aren't supposed to feel angry. Men aren't supposed to cry, and women cannot feel angry. And so I think like allowance for feeling is one thing, but then like knowing how to process it in a healthy way so that we're not taking revenge on other people. And all this unprocessed grief is just being like vomited on everyone and everything, when it's clearly like an endogenous thing, so
Mm.
based on internal triggers. So how do we delineate how do we become more aware? I think getting more specific with that, like becoming the observer of maybe the bodily sensations, the physiological reactions, um, focusing on our, coming to the present moment, the contemplation, the contemplative way of thinking, more as a culture, and being able to just really sit and be with our emotions rather than like reacting, like just in an outrageous, revengeful way.
and
Mm.
that's it, Sarah. How do you become more aware? You practice awareness. Well, how do you practice awareness? Well, one of the things you do is you step aside from your thoughts because nothing keeps you less aware, less present than continuing to process what's inside your head, especially if they're obsessive thought patterns that continue to spin over and over and over again, that are then creating compulsive behavior patterns that repeat over and over and over again. We're inside that bubble. We're inside our own thought world. We're not really present to what's around us. And so, do you see now the genius of contemplation? If we are actually practicing in a structured way, in a disciplined way, the technique and the art of stepping aside from all of that interior activity, then we're learning how to really be present and to actually see what's in front of us without the filter, without the coloration of all of that stuff, because everything that we're talking about here resides in that egoic consciousness. To step aside from that and to have a vacation for a couple of moments shows us who this watcher really is in a pure state. And the more that we can do that, the more we have that under our fingertips, the more quickly we can move into that state and hold it, then the better chance we're going to be able to do exactly that in the rest of our day, especially when we're being triggered. We'll have that awareness and that technique available to us to be able to go back to that centered place and make different decisions. But it's like anything else, it just has to be practiced. There is no way to think your way through this or read it in a book and have it be available to you when it's going to be needed. So it's a matter of practice. But that's why contemplation is such a powerful tool. Now, if you are engaged in CBT, in cognitive behavioral therapy, you're going to be doing the same thing. I mean, think about what CBT is going to be giving you in terms of the practices and the exercises there. It's going to be helping you again to identify what's happening in the moment and to make different choices and change the way that you behave and the way that you think. And if you're getting into DBT, even better, because now you're balancing, acceptance and change. And so you get the best of both worlds. But whether you're doing it clinically or whether you're doing it spiritually, it's really the same process. And if we don't do that, then the Furies have us. He goes on, when you can let go of it, after properly acknowledging it, okay, so this isn't about stuffing, right? This isn't about pushing it away. It's acknowledging. It's kind of like the welcoming practice, right? You get triggered by the emotion, you acknowledge it, you welcome it, you own it, and then you work your way back into the present moment. So when you can let go of it after properly acknowledging it, and let's be clear about letting go of it is not pushing it away, not wishing it in the cornfield. It's putting yourself right back into the present moment and immersing there enough that it displaces all of this stuff. You do that indirectly as well. Anything that you really focus energy on, even if it's negative energy, only gets stronger because you're feeding it. But to let it atrophy by focusing in the present, by coming and putting your presence back down, that can displace it. So if you can, when you let go of it after properly acknowledging it, you can probably retrieve it without its excessive charge and then use it effectively. So in other words, what's he saying? Once you're free of those interior triggers, you've resolved those particular issues, then you can approach that anger or that situation, and then you can do it, quote unquote, righteously. You can do it in a way that is measured and that is appropriate to the situation. But we have to go through the process before that's going to be available. And if you can't do that, I hate to say it, but you are likely possessed and need an exorcism. Okay. In other words, the Furies have you. You are a slave to your triggers. You're a slave to your core beliefs that you don't even know are operating. If you need to hate the president, your former wife, or the man who humiliated you, this is not God's anger, it's yours. Or as we're going to say, this is not exogenous anger. This is not righteous anger. This is not anger that is based in a clear and present danger. It's something that we are just reliving from our past over and over and over again as these strong, virulent emotions. As the School of Paul wisely puts it, you must not let the sun go down on your anger, which is far different than not feeling your anger at all. Okay, that's important. I think, as Sarah was saying, we need to feel this. If we're not feeling anything, then we're also not doing the work. But not let the sun go down on your anger. Now, that's not literal in the sense of a 24-hour day, right? We're not talking about that. But don't let it metastasize. Don't let it become a part of who you are, as we were talking earlier with Judy about the political issues that have now just become a part of the fabric of not only people's individual lives, but kind of the fabric of our national life as well. That's metastasized. That's now a permanent feature of the landscape. That's what we don't want to see. That's what we don't want to let the sun go down on. And then this last paragraph, some anger is needed and deserved. And we talked about that. In terms of that idea of anger that's focused on some clear and present danger. But too much for too long will usually develop into a pathology that only blinds and destroys the angry person and the other party too. I'd probably take the usually and put an always in there, you know. It's always going to develop into a pathology that blinds and destroys the angry person and the other party too. And now he's going to come to his prompt, to his practice, a way around this. Very often I find the whole thing can dissipate very quickly with one sincere smile, hug, or word from another human being. Have you ever experienced that? I would imagine we all have at one point or another, where you're feeling all of this stuff. Maybe, maybe you got a text that just righteously pissed you off, right? And you're feeling all that anger and everything. And then the moment that you get the next communication that you misunderstood or they misspoke or whatever, and then doesn't it all just kind of deflate like a balloon that
Mhm.
you let go of and it's just all gone. It's just that quickly, it's just all gone, right?
My favorite one is when my nephews were younger and I lose my mind with them. Like if they laugh at me. And I actually shared that with an ex, and it was a very effective way to just bring me back down to earth. Like if you can just remember to laugh, I'm just saying it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that's so perfect, William. That's perfect.
Lenny used to be an incredible actor. And we would have some really charged discussions, on whatever nights we were doing our studies on.
Mhm.
And, I can remember some very tense moments when there was total silence in the room, a lot of differences of opinion. And he would just blurt something out. And it was
Complete
it would just dissipate the whole thing.
Mhm.
I remember one retreat that we went to. This was years ago. You might have been there, Scott. And something was being discussed. It was the whole room. There's probably 75 guys there in this room, and something was being discussed, and the discussion got really heated. And whoever were the actual combatants, they got to this fever pitch, and then there was just this break and this silence. And in that silence, our lead pastor went, "This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine." And everybody just burst into laughter, and the whole spell was broken. It was just amazing how that one little thing changed everything. And this is what he's talking about. You know, all of that anger, this huge thing that you would think that the sky is falling and the tectonic plates are moving, and this one little smile, this one little hug, this one silly little song, this one bit of laughter from a nephew or a niece completely diffuses the whole thing. So what does that tell you? Well, he says they're serving as your exorcist, but he's also saying it reveals the actual emptiness of the anger. If it can be deflated that fast, then what the heck substance was there to begin with, right? Seriously, if it can be deflated that quickly, there really wasn't anything there. It was just all here, just
Mhm.
that thought world. And you think you're living it, but it's not real. Remember, the reality that you believe is a reality that you endure. If it can be deflated that quickly, there really was no substance there. They're serving as your exorcist. They're literally taking the demon out. And you might almost resent them for doing it,
Mhm.
And why would you resent them for doing it? Can you think psychologically for a reason why we do? Why would we? Sometimes we do.
Going back to what you said before, you're identifying with your victimhood.
Exactly. I think that's exactly it. They're stealing your victimhood. They're
Mhm.
stealing your blankie. They're stealing your defense system,
Yeah.
and you're not ready to give it up.
Mhm.
But I really think that's what's going on here. This is what you've come to rely on. You stay in that space long enough, and it's all you really know. You need that drama. You need that person to blame, and you'll manufacture it if it's not there. And then someone comes in and deflates that in a heartbeat. I mean, that's not going to go over well. That stuff does not go quietly into the night. So
Mhm.
maybe when the Furies have you, he says, you can practice. Your practice can be to make eye contact, and smile at another person. In other words, you can be the catalyst for this. You don't have to wait for it to happen from somebody else, but you can be the one who simply puts your arm around another person. You can be the one who smiles or sings the little ditty song or whatever it happens to be, deliberately detaching from your furies. But it won't be easy and it won't come naturally. So this is his prompt in this section. This is his practice point. We have to bring the awareness into play. If we don't have the awareness in the moment, none of this is possible. But if we can just get that little bit of detachment from the feelings that are being triggered, and then we can take the opposite action. Those are the two tools that we have to really dislodge deeply held patterns in our lives: awareness and opposite action. Those are the two that are going to be able to take us out of and into real transformational change. So we got to be aware that the Furies have us. We have at least have to suspect that this overblown emotion just needs a pinprick, and because we've seen them as overblown, and then we can take the opposite action. And it doesn't even have to be when everything is blowing up. It can be while something is still simmering. This one story of a woman who was in our church in the early days. She said that there was a woman that she worked with that just made her skin crawl. All this woman had to do was come around the corner and everything in her reacted. And so she had a choice to make. Was she going to act on the way she felt about this woman, or was she going to do something else? And she decided to just absolutely kill her with kindness, to go the exact opposite way. And at that point, when she was telling the story, they were best friends. Whatever it was that she was triggering in her was not real. And by becoming aware of it enough that she could do the opposite action and act as if this woman really was her best friend, it was self-fulfilling. We can do that, but not if we're not aware. And we won't be aware until we do this work of contemplation or of therapy or whatever we're going to do. But we got to do something that brings the awareness forward.
I love the idea of the exorcist, and the possessed never likes the person who is conducting the exorcism. And to think of my trigger as helping me with my own exorcism is just beautiful.
Yeah. Any concluding thoughts? That was a good section. There's a lot in there.
There was a lot.
See how psychological this is, though, and for for some Christians, this would be way too much psychology. It couldn't possibly be spiritual if it's psychological, right? But you can't extricate the two. Just like we've said, if you're here breathing in your skin suit, right, then the only way that you are going to be able to live out your spirituality is through your physicality. You can't separate it from your physicality. You can only pray through it. You can only live through it. And the way that we experience our physicality is through our psychology. We can't separate that either. These things are not mutually exclusive, and they're not at odds with each other. Jesus' way is good psychology, absolutely good psychology. And we can't be afraid to say that, and we can't be afraid to use that as we go forward.
Okay, I gotta say something though.
Okay, come on, Danielle. Bring it on.
I love, okay, I'm not gonna say I love CBT and DBT because I do it every day. I think the tools are very, very good. And all that you're saying, all is true and everything. But I also want to kind of bring us back to the prompt that you had last week of saying that there's so much of the unconscious that's still there, in which this language would be so foreign. And, some would look at us like we had three heads if we used some of this and thought that it was that simple for them. So I just want to kind of bring that out there and throw that in, because I think this is great for this group right now, because we're in that stage of life where we're here because we're wanting to learn about contemplation, and these are great skills to have. But I'm just also thinking of a lot of the clients that I work with and others, friends of mine that may not be in a position to be able to hear it, may need to hear it in another way, and are dealing with some of the unconscious stuff is still not conscious yet. So it's messy, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And it's just like with people in early recovery, you don't get all theoretical with them. You don't get
Yeah.
abstract with them. You give them the next indicated step, and it's got
Yeah.
to be concrete and it's got to be doable. Otherwise, what are we doing? Right?
Mm.
And fortunately, that's what Jesus gives us. He gives us the next indicated step. That's really all he gives us. And he gives it wrapped in poetry and metaphor and figurative speech and all of that. And he doesn't give us the theory. We can extract the theory from it in hindsight, especially now with psychology being developed the way it's been developed for the last 150 years. Um, but yeah, just the next indicated step. Now, for us here, we're reading this book and he's getting psychological on us. And so, yeah, let's go ahead and extract those principles. If they're useful for you, beautiful. If they're not, take what you need and leave the rest. Put it on the shelf. If it's just messing things up, if it's getting too overly complicated, then it's not helpful. Then you don't need it. Just figure out what the next indicated step is. Simple step, not easy, but still simple. So, yeah, good point, Danielle. All right, then I think we're done. We did good. So we'll be hitting the next one, which is what? What's the next chapter? Scanning for malware, or did I miss one? Oh, attending to the breath.
Yeah.
The fourth one, attending to the breath. So we'll pick it up there next week. All right, Scotty.
Lord, thank you for this time, this connection, this learning and growing and exploring and all the fun we have. Sometimes it's not fun and sometimes it's abundantly fun. But it's all exciting because we can feel it, we can taste it, and our senses are locked onto it. And we're growing. We're learning the things that we need to learn to explore and have this journey that we're on. And we're just grateful that we can do it with each other and with you. Thank you for all that we're learning and all that we have to look forward to. We love you, Lord. It's in your precious and holy name that we pray and we give our thanks and we say our amens. Amen.
Amen. All right. Thanks, everybody.
You got it, guys.
All right.
We need Bill to stop dominating the conversation.
Yeah.
Thanks, everyone. See you Sunday.
All right. Take
All
care,
right.
guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye, Jordana. Bye, Jordana. Good night, sweetie.
Bye, Jordana.
Bye. See you guys on Sunday.
Bye, George. George, he always freezes right in that same spot, it seems like. Interesting. Okay, Jordana, see you Sunday, dear.
All right, there.
Okay, bye-bye.